All right, we are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday. Nick Barris here, and we're talking politics, and we're going to talk about one of the great governors in this state's history on a day when politics is at the center point anyway, because we've got the debate tonight. And with us this morning is a former congressman from here in this area, of course, is Bob Clement, and we're talking about his father, Frank G. Clement. And, you know, you talk about legacy, and there is your father. We've got his image up on the screen. I try to look at him, and, you know, it's interesting. I see a bit of you in his face, and I also see a bit of your brother Frank.
Absolutely. And as you know, my brother Frank's on the Court of Appeals and done very well, representing all the Tennessee. Matter of fact, he got Judge of the Year a few years ago as well. And we both had public service careers. He doesn't necessarily look at himself as a politician, which he should not, as a judge. And then I've had the opportunities, you know, Nick, to serve on the Public Service Commission and TVA and college president, member of Congress. And so I've spent about half my life in public service and half in the private sector.
Yeah, well, really, I mean, you have had an amazing life of public service. When you talk about the legacy of your father, you and Frank certainly are a big part of that. And we have some video we're going to roll from this documentary that's part of this centennial tribute to your father, 100 years. But yeah, when you think about the legacy, and I've got a bunch I can touch on here, but your father just seemed like someone who was obviously an independent thinker that at times would be willing to go with something that maybe was unpopular among constituents to a degree, but that in his heart he knew was right.
That's true, Nick. He always said, you know, a lot of your decisions, even though they're right decisions, they might be very unpopular, but ultimately they'll be popular. And that sure applied when he sent National Guard and Highway Patrol into Clinton, Tennessee, to restore law and order when some agitators blew up the Clinton High School to keep blacks from going to school with whites. And my father integrated the first public school, not in Tennessee, but in the South, in Clinton, Tennessee, and integrated the schools all over the state of Tennessee in the 50s, and 1956 was the beginning, yes.
In large measure.
And also...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, too, one of the best things he ever did, well, he made up his mind when he was age 16, I'm going to be governor of Tennessee. Didn't have money, didn't have contacts, grew up in Dixon County. Matter of fact, he was born in a railroad hotel, authentic railroad hotel that's now the Clement Railroad Hotel Museum, and that's where he was born. But what happened then, even at age 16, he used to tell people, I'm going to be governor of Tennessee. And he was a great orator, great speaker. And everything he said and did from the time he was 16 to age 32 was toward that one goal and objective, to be governor of Tennessee. One of the first things he did was free textbooks for kids in public school, because a lot of kids had to look over the shoulder of another kid to get an education because their families couldn't afford to buy them textbooks. And he ended that practice where we had free textbooks for state of Tennessee. Yeah, one of the best things he ever did.
You take that for granted, you know, textbooks in schools, and you realize there was a time when it wasn't like that. What an amazing thing to do. I mean, that's incredible. And again, he was a forward thinker when it came to issues of race. And you mentioned what happened with Clinton High School. I mean, he also, I think, was one of the people that recognized early on Tennessee's death row the fact that there were so many African Americans, and he was not necessarily making a judgment of whether or not they committed the crime or not, but it was of his belief that he felt, regardless, they likely did not get good legal representation. And at one point, didn't he go in and commute the sentences for, what, a half dozen on death row, not releasing them, but taking them off death row? And that was his thinking, because he felt they just did not have good legal representation. It wasn't fair.
That's correct. That's correct, Nick. And there were 6 on death row, all black, and all from Memphis, Tennessee. And here we got 95 counties in the state. And he went out to the prison, and he says, I can save your life. I can't save your soul, but I'm commuting your sentence to 99 years behind bars. And he did let some die in his first terms as governor of Tennessee, but then he noticed in the last term how the unfairness, weren't getting fair trials, and changed it. And also, I might say to you, we enjoy the community colleges and technical schools around the state. The Clement administration established that once upon a time to go down that road, as well as the first Department of Mental Health in Tennessee history, because you had the men and women in your penal institutions and the men and women in your mental hospitals all under the same department. He put a qualified doctor head of that department.
Let's take a quick phone call before we have to take our next break for you. And I think we have Joe. Joe, good morning. Do you have a question or comment for Bob Clement?
Just a comment to Bob. I want to kind of take him back to the good old days. I'm glad that Bob and Mary is doing well, and he's got grandchildren that's doing well. But I want to take him back. My wife is Betty Cross. Her father was the head of the security detail for Governor Clement, and she spent many fond days at the mansion, swimming and having lunch with Bob and his brothers. And he was a gentleman then, and he's a gentleman now. But a couple of other things. If I'm not mistaken, Governor Clement spoke at the Democratic National Convention because he was such a great speaker. And the second thing I'll say to Bob is the Music City Star, if it hadn't been for him, there wouldn't be no Music City Star. A lot of people don't realize that, and a lot of people didn't like it, didn't want it when he got involved in it, but it's turned out to be a great thing. And I wish him well, and I hope that we can get our politics in the United States straightened out a little bit, where it's not such a diversity. So good luck, Bob, and thank you for what you've done.
Thank you so much, Joe. Yeah, you know what he's talking about.
Oh, I sure do. And he's referring to a person by the name of Harold Cross that was over the security detail at the governor's residence, did a great job. Love his family, and I appreciate you calling in very much, because we had the highway patrol at the governor's residence when we lived there. 10 years lived there. And when Dad was governor, and Dad worked about 30 prisoners a day out at the residence too, because he's a former FBI agent that believed in rehabilitation. And so the prisoners and the highway patrol, and that was an experience in itself to have that. I'll never forget those days, and I appreciate him bringing those memories back to me.
And he's right, too. In the documentary, again, that's going to air here at News Channel 5 on Sunday, they actually have some of the video of when your father did speak at the convention with Harry Truman there, correct?
That's correct. This was 1956. Okay. And Harry Truman had more to do with Dad being the keynote speaker in 56 than anyone else. And Dad was on the short list for Truman to groom a few people to run for president of the United States. But as you know, my father was killed in an automobile accident in 1969. He was only 49 years old and got elected governor when he was 32 years old. He was always on the fast track, but accomplished so much in so few years. But his legacy lives on, and we have this legacy event at the Clement Museum every year, and I want everyone to come visit us at Dixon, Tennessee. It's the Governor Frank G. Clement Railroad Hotel Museum. And yes, we're having a documentary Sunday at 2 o'clock. Everyone can tune in on Facebook.
Yes, and you give awards, and one of the recipients this year is someone that you went head-to-head with many a time in politics, Lamar Alexander, and he speaks in the documentary too. And it's interesting that while you guys obviously were fierce rivals in many of the races, and that you basically ended up in different parties, I know you've been very gracious to him, but he was very gracious as well. In his words, you guys are friends.
That's amazing, and that's what politics ought to be about. I guess I'm somewhat forgiven too. Yes, we ran against one another for political office, and one of the 3 recipients of the Legacy Award at the Clement Museum, which will be October the 25th this weekend, and is Lamar Alexander. And here we oppose one another, and we're honoring it, and honoring not only Lamar, but also Jeannie Seeley, who's been on the Grand Ole Opry for over 50 years. Well, you talk about a trailblazer, a great friend. She's been very involved in the museum. And then Craig Morgan. Matter of fact, he lives in Dixon County, and Craig has a store there in Dixon County as well. So they're the 3 recipients: Lamar Alexander, Jeannie Seeley, and Craig Morgan. And last year we honored Ray Stevens and Ralph Emery. They were big hits as well.
Well, that's great. We'll talk more about that. And yeah, I'll tell you what, it's just worth the visit to the railroad, the Clement Railroad Museum there, right? That's where your father grew up. I guess that's where, his parents were, and they ran the hotel, right?
Well, they lived there for a short period of time. That's where he was born.
Yeah,
my great-grandmother lived in Scottsville, Kentucky. Her husband died very young age. She had 5 children. She noticed that the Halbrook Hotel needed a manager, and because it was at a railroad hotel, people would get off the train. That's when you had rail passenger service.
Yeah.
Get off the train, and they, rather than being called salesmen, Nick, back in those days, they were drummers, drumming up business. And they'd stay at hotel where my great-grandmother and grandmother managed. Now, for 50 cents, you got a room. But if you paid another 25 cents, you got a shower as well. So a grand total of 75 cents to stay there and get a shower.
What a deal. Listen, we got to take a break on that note. When we come back, Congressman, continue our conversation. We've got more phone calls for you as well, and we'll continue with the program right after these commercial messages.